So I want to welcome you. We will start sharp as it's Friday, and thank you for being here with us. And we hope you enjoy your Friday with our distinguished speakers. Mr. Yannis Kotsis Yanarakis, Mr. Petros Oukoulias, Mr. Tom Gatsioulas, Thanasi Gatsioulas. Thank you very much for being with us. I just want to make a short introduction, about 1 2 minutes. I need to say that I'm coordinator of the Mindspark, and this webinar is brought to you by SEKEE or HAMAC, the Hellenic Association of Mobile Applications. It's an organization that counts 80 members, and all the members are working around and the association's work is around innovation and technology.
Yes.
Fantastic. So the program is like this. You will hear Tom Katsioulas, Thanasis Katsioulas will start first, then Mr. Yannis Kotsis Yanarakis, and then Mr. Petros Oukoulias will follow, and we have plenty of time for discussion afterwards.
Everybody, this is morning here in Silicon Valley. Apologies for the change of schedule. So I had to go first. I was planning to go last. I am the board chair of the Global Semiconductor Alliance Trusted IoT Ecosystem Security. I'm an ecosystem strategy, but I don't stay in strategy. I like to do implementation. And my big message to you today is when you look at your company, you're part of an association for mobile applications. When you look at your company, you have to look at your company not as a single part of an industry, but as part of a connected ecosystem. In fact, mobile applications are part of the IoT ecosystem, and they're part of the edge of the value chain. So you can look at yourself as a product feature company, or you can look at yourself as part of a business ecosystem. And if you actually, in order to do that, you have to change your mindset. And in order to understand how that works, we're going to go today through the ecology of competition and collaborating innovation that starts from the old days in the 90s when I was an engineer like you, and basically has evolved to today's environment, which is enabled by digital transformation and ecosystem platforms. So in order to start that, we're going to go very far back in the Harvard Business Review article of 1993, which is about, it's called Predators and Prey, which is the definition of business ecosystem. No platforms existed then. A business ecosystem is like a biological counterpart moving from a random collection of species and elements to a more structured community of capital partners, suppliers, customers that create cooperative networks. Of course, back then, those networks were not as connected as they are today. But the reason the analogy works is because every ecosystem goes through an evolution. So if you want to actually build an ecosystem around your product, you have to go through an evolution where there's a complex interplay between competition and cooperation, because your partners, suppliers, and customers may actually also have solutions. So in order to do that, you go through 4 stages. The first stage is the birth, where essentially you're basically on a bare ground, no life, and you're trying to capture an initial territory. At that point, as an entrepreneur, you care about what customers want, what is the value of the product or service you're going to offer, and how you're going to actually basically deliver that in a territory and start capturing territory. All right, and that gets you to the second phase, which is expansion, where you're going to start adding value add components. And those components I'm using the notion very generally. It's not just features, it's not a plugins, it's not just APIs, but it could be essentially partners and suppliers that are connect. So that's now where the life starts to emerge, the grass starts to grow, the water starts basically getting life in it, and the land. And that's where you start experiencing resistance in your business because of rival ecosystems. There's the antelope and there's a lion, right? So here, in order to expand, you have to basically have two major conditions accomplished in your company after you penetrated the market. The first one is a business concept that is large enough to essentially address the value in a large set of customers. Big concept, big business concept, but a large set of customers. And then the second one is the potential to scale to a broader, market and many more territories, right? And if you can accomplish that, you're going to start living into a much more complex ecosystem where now there's big fish, small fish, there's big bird, small bird, there's the lion and the antelope. And now the change of the ecosystem changes, the game changes, because you need to struggle to determine how you're going to grow among your species at the expense of other species. So if you're an antelope, you better just run when you see the lions, right? The conditions here is that in order to survive in that, stage 3 of leadership, you have to basically have very strong growth and profitability, and more importantly, a stable structure of your value add components, being partners, suppliers, features, plugins, etc. That's extremely important. And if you can actually do that, then you go to the Nirvana state, which is essentially the self-renewal, which actually is extremely interesting because you grow to be very, very big and in a mature business. But now communities around you, other ecosystems are threatened, and then new ecosystems are rising. And if you don't actually find a way to scale, then you can actually face a very disruptive effect. This is the stage where you can scale and become a Google or an Apple or what have you. But even when you become that big, you have a problem of essentially an earthquake, a major disruption event that can happen, in the world that can actually put you down. And we've seen that happen in many, many companies in the past. Those can be government regulations, customer buying patterns, economics, etc. And if you manage to scale that level, you're good. But if you don't, you're going to go to death. Back in the early 90s, Qualcomm had a huge, huge audience of developers under its Brew platform for mobile applications. All right. You probably are. Some of you may know that. And that disappeared literally in 6 months after Apple introduced the iPhone. Huge disruptive event. Of course, that whole ecosystem died for Qualcomm. So there is some very basic concepts in terms of the 4 stages: birth, expansion, leadership, and self-renewal. Fundamentally, in each stage, you have to achieve certain, cooperative challenges, but you also have to guard against some competitive challenges. So initially, you have to work with customers and suppliers to establish your market presence, but at the same time, you need to protect your ideas. Then you need to bring, essentially, you need to start adding new components, new partners, new suppliers, new features, new APIs. But at the same time, you got to be aware of all the other part of your ecosystem and what they're doing in terms of alternative implementation, similar ideas, to make sure that you stay on top. And this is the difference between thinking as a product business company, where you care about features, versus thinking as an ecosystem platform company, where basically you care about the whole ecosystem, how you can differentiate and get yourself ahead of the pack. Of course, in the leadership, now you have basically established a growth, you establish a profitability. Now you have to have a vision that essentially allows you to scale. But as you scale, you have to maintain strong bargaining power in relation to the place ecosystem, so you can keep attracting more. And of course, Apple has been very successful in doing that with the app developers, some of which are your companies, obviously. And finally, the self-renewal stage, where essentially you have to bring co-innovation from adjacent ecosystems. If you don't do that, you'll never be able to scale, all right? So, and that's what is needed to create barriers for preventing other innovators, for essentially disrupting the ecosystem that you've built. And those, by the way, those concepts, this table you see, that was 1993. Harvard Business Review, you can look at this article, Predators and Prey, and it's a very interesting article, how the industry evolved for the hardware and software. But the most important thing here is that at the time, there was not such a thing as platforms. It's the old ecosystem level. So since then, businesses have evolved. And I'm putting that graphic here because Yanis will show it to you later. How do we go from a product to intelligent connected product, to product system, and to system of systems? In fact, if you look at what happened from the 90s, when we had that particular article in HBR today, this is what's happened in the industry. Back then, I was an engineer, and we had very straightforward products. We basically offered hardware, chips, or PCBs, or systems, and software that goes on top of it. So it was a simple product license. We defined our target audience. We defined our sales channels being global markets. And of course, we had to basically face a customer support. I started as an application engineer myself. And that was not an easy thing to do. You have to fly, you have to sit down with a customer, you have to solve problems. It was an extremely difficult thing to do, all right? And then, internet starts growing. And at the same time, if you look at the electronics value chain that starts from chips all the way to hardware, software systems, enterprise systems, etc., there was a disaggregation of the value chain. I was fortunate enough to start a company called Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC, that had the full banana in it, from chip design, chip manufacturing, PCB design, system design. We even had the first internet before the internet occurred. We had the DECnet. All right. And I was extremely fortunate to go to that school when I started my career, because I understood the whole value chain within a single company. Unfortunately, that changed. We had essentially pure, design companies, AC companies, manufacturing companies, assembly companies, etc. So, and at the same time, because the product had more parts, you had to start essentially finding ways to essentially configure the different options. That's where the first web portals occurred, just about when Amazon was starting the e-commerce, which led to the third level. As the internet commerce started occurring, then we're seeing essentially new models emerging, mostly on the software side, based on existing ecosystems of computers, service, etc., SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. And that's when we start seeing the multi-sided platform strategies that have evolved today to what we know today: the Apple, the Airbnb, the Google, etc. Basically, those strategies based on a web and mobile presence, all right, whereby your whole ecosystem becomes a value-add component to your entire concept of platform. And of course, everybody understands the iPhone platform. It's an architecture that allows you to build applications, and the more app developers you bring in, the bigger the value of the platform. And of course, that's the value scales so much that now, Apple is facing all these lawsuits and regulatory things that, to limit the amount of control they have in the ecosystem, right? But Apple and Google and all these guys are not invincible, all right? Because we're entering the next stage of the IoT, driven by IoT, which is essentially a virtual disaggregation of the supply chain, reaggregation. So from chip all the way to the edge applications, even though we're disaggregated and disconnected, now the whole value chain becomes connected. And when the whole value chain becomes connected, the concept of how do you establish a digital data thread to be able to monetize that data that comes all the way from the underlying product to the edge, that basically is a platform ecosystem approach. It's an IoT supply chain platform ecosystem approach from development all the way to the field use of applications. But let's talk a little bit about what is the notion of platform companies. Platform companies are very simple, are companies that scale through multi-sided platforms, technologies and product services that create value by enabling direct interactions between two or more customers and participant groups. Look in 10 years, how the whole world has changed in terms of the most valuable by market capitalization companies in the world. And look at the pink here companies, essentially how they scale so rapidly. Now, why is that? Well, part of it is because a platform is a business model of enabling value-creating interactions between external producers and consumers. The Internet of Things, of course, presents a competing, an architecture view that, you can think of it as everything in one box, but it creates economies of scales with ecosystem, because everyone in the ecosystem has access to all functions, right? So it's not just the design of the device, the iPhone, for example, but it's the design of the ecosystem around the device. And this is what IoT presents. It presents the ability not to create just connected devices, but connected suppliers of the devices and services that those suppliers can actually offer on top of those devices. That is actually like a razor with a razor blade. The razor is a hardware, the razor blade is a software, and of course, monetization is a service. Now, to scale the network, you have to create not only interactions, but also scale the network effects, all right? You cannot scale the network effects inside the firm as easily as you could do it outside the firm, because very simple, your firm is limited and there are more people and devices outside your firm, all right? So in platforms, the goal is to have as many interactions as possible. Not only have to have your architecture, your platform, but also facilitate interaction as possible. But we always think of platforms as a software or website, or perhaps a hardware that allows you to add razor blade services. Um, but let me just give you the dramatic shift in businesses in terms of cost and revenue, on platforms. Look at the pink components there. Look at the difference between the market capitalization versus, the actual employees. So if you look at Facebook, for example, all right, or if you look, it's 30,000 employees, $473 billion market capitalization as of a year ago, 2 years ago. All right. Now compare that with BMW, 51 billion and 131 employees. So you can see immediately, if you had an actual platform business strategy, how this would scale and what it means in terms of creating a highly profitable business that is also highly scalable and growing. So these are fundamental things. And by the way, you will see in each slide that I have a source and a link. When that is posted, you can go dive into more of those concepts I'm talking about. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm bringing my experience organized in platform strategies that are being explored in Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan School of Management, etc. Now, why do platform businesses scale so fast? All right. And why did they become really hyperscalers in the last year and a half? I mean, since COVID-19 hit. Finance and energy, if you look at these ecosystems, have led losses, whereas the big tech, as we call it here, platforms have led gains. What's the difference? All right. Well, first of all, a lot of those platforms have purely software, in which case you don't have manufacturing, you don't have to worry about supply chain, etc. All right. You bridge essentially a producer with a consumer, and that bridging creates some value that you monetize. Interesting enough, that picture is a simple producer consumer, or a bunch of producers linked with a bunch of consumers, right? And there is a value hand. But if this was a value chain, if it was a supply chain, that thing can multiply much more if your platform was essentially an orchestration platform. Okay, so you can see here, information technology, all right, how much bigger in Amazon, all right, how much bigger is compared to the rest and how it grew. So that's the power platforms. So now let's talk a little bit about the types of platforms, all right? There's an article again that I'm quoting that it basically classifies them to 3 categories: innovation, transaction, and hybrid. So innovation platforms facilitate the development of new and complementary, underlying here, complementary products and services, such as the PC, smartphone apps that are built mostly third-party companies and without any traditional supply contracts. By complementary, essentially, we mean that these innovations add functionality or assets to the platform. This is a key source of network effects because that is essentially making the platform more attractive. It gets more people to come in. They deliver and capture value by directly selling or renting a product or service compared to traditional businesses. And of course, if you think about this, by the way, essentially innovation platforms enable third parties to add products and services. And the good examples are essentially Apple, Google, and AWS, because the innovation platforms are basically are driven by a centralized architecture and a web-based infrastructure environment that allows to attract all these parties to add products and services that grow products. Next one is transaction platforms. Transaction platforms enable the exchange of information, goods, and services. Essentially, those are intermediary platforms or online marketplaces that make it possible for participants to exchange goods and services or information. Information is also a lot of value. The more participants and functions, the faster it's the more useful it becomes, the faster it scales and can scale rapidly and exponentially. These platforms essentially create value by enabling exchanges that would not be otherwise occur without the platform being the intermediary. They capture value by collecting transaction fees or charging for advertising. Google Search, Amazon Marketplace, Facebook, Tencent, WeChat, Alibaba, all those platforms. And then we have the hybrid in the middle. In the middle, you see the intersection of those 2 circles. whereas companies that have, that contain both innovation and transaction platforms. The strategies are novel because in the early stages of the PC and the internet innovation and transaction platforms, there were distinct businesses, but they became platform businesses connecting buyers and sellers, advertisers and consumers or users of social networks, appearing to be fundamentally different activity from stimulating outside companies to create complementary innovations. And those is pretty much the state of, this is the state of, sorry. Okay, thank you, Leo. So this is the state of the industry, the world today. There is another type of platform that I would like to introduce that is not based on technology, that is not based on web services necessarily, but it's a new concept of what I call collaboration platform. Essentially, collaboration platform brings diverse experts for firms in a connected value chains to co-innovate end-to-end solutions. When you think about connected value chain, all right, or actually, if you think about collaboration platform, Zoom, what we're using right now is a collaboration platform, right? We took off during COVID-19, all right? MS Teams is a collaboration platform. There's other project-based collaboration platforms. But when you go to connected value chains, in order to leverage those platforms, you need to essentially use increased digital transformation or digitalization. That digital transformation, digitalization has been accelerated by COVID-19. And there's a number of McKinsey articles that I could share in terms of how digital transformation and IoT play hand to hand in creating essentially a novel, scaling innovation. However, I want to emphasize something. There's this business of platformania. Everybody uses the word platform, but they don't even mean they don't even know what it means, right? And if you actually look at the studies that were done in many, many platform businesses, not just to say the word to be slick, right? But platform businesses, 250 of them, there was a study that most of them fail, all right? And unless you understand the failure, you'll never be able to build an ecosystem platform of your own. And there are basically, maybe 6 or 7 reasons why they fail. The first one is to fail to optimize openness. Platforms have to be very open. You have to invite all the people to come in. The second one is once you be open, you have, they have to engage stakeholders. In the case of Apple, the stakeholders is the developers, but in the case of collaborating platform, the stakeholders may be essentially diverse experts that do stuff. And the third thing, which is a failure, is the failure to create surplus. What is a surplus? When you bring a bunch of people, experts, developers, etc., partner suppliers, you create what we call the collective ecosystem oomph, the collective ecosystem surplus. If it was a bunch of diverse experts, you create a collective ecosystem IQ. If you don't manage to leverage that collective IQ or surplus and publish it back and share it with the ecosystem, you're dead. There's no, the ecosystems grow by continues to feed them. It's an ecosystem, you got to feed them with stuff. So when you collect a bunch of people, partners, suppliers, customers, IQ, and you collect all that stuff, all right, you got to package that stuff and feed it back to the ecosystem. Otherwise, you don't create surplus, otherwise you're going to fail. Next one is, another source of failure is the inability to emphasize, failure to emphasize the right side by connecting consumers and producers. If you put a weight in one, if you put a weight more in the producers and less in the consumers, you're never going to scale. If you put more weight in the consumers and less in the producers, you're not going to scale. So you have to have essentially a right balance in order to bring the sweet spot of scaling. The other failure that I did is to put critical mass ahead of, ahead of money. This is a big one. Everybody who starts an ecosystem thinks, oh, I'm going to go make money right away. And this is a mistake, all right? Because the right way to build an ecosystem is to get initial investment that's sufficient enough to create what we call critical mass, all right? And that's basically called before you even think about money, once you have the critical mass and you have that collective ecosystem IQ, that collective ecosystem asset, now there's plenty of ways to make money. And there are plenty of ways to make money that you could not even imagine, all right? Because you wouldn't know what those are before you built that ecosystem. So creating a critical mass before starting thinking about money is actually very important. I'm not saying we should not try to make money. You still make money on your product and feature, but you should keep in your mind the bigger ecosystem strategy on how you're going to basically create that critical mass. And of course, the final one is, related to the previous one. In order to do all those above and not fail, you have to stop thinking on product features, and you have to start thinking how, or, in terms of how your company fits in an ecosystem. Let me give you an example. HAMAC, an association of companies of mobile applications, all right? You're an association. What is your common objective? All right. Your common objective is you put a wonderful website. You basically advertise your association. All right. But how does this help you really monetize the collective IQ and value of that association? Right. If you really think about it, that association could essentially thrive and gain more value for all its stakeholders by creating a collaborative platform. In fact, I'm going to show you an example of that with a Global Semiconductor Alliance, which is also an association, all right? And if you can actually create a platform and then eventually add technology to manage that platform to essentially create that value ecosystem of your association, and then if the 10,000 other associations in Greece do the same, and each and every one of them creates a platform, and if the 10,001 associations with HAMAC essentially get organized and orchestrated on a bigger platform, and if we connect that platform, all the Greeks in the diaspora, I can tell you right now, it could be a very important thing for Greece, and that's my vision of what I would like to do sometime in the next 10 years. So from the old ecology, where there were no platforms, to the new ecology, where there are platforms, the actual principles remain the same. You got birth, expansion, leadership, self-renewal. And the birth is the launch, the scale, the maturity, and the evolution. But now, if you want to be smart about it, you got to develop metrics in managing your ecosystem, and you got to keep abreast of the red flags that could lead to a devastation event and to death. So you got to keep all those things in balance. I'm not going to go into details. You can go look at that things in the article that I put before, but it's exactly the same like we started in '93 with the Predators and Prey. Now you have a platform, now you have a community, the community is connected, but you have the opportunity with this platform to actually develop and maintain key success metrics, but also find ways to assess any red flags in terms of the competition, which is fundamentally adding value to the ecosystem, but is also trying to find ways to disrupt you and create their own ecosystem. That brings us to the very basic set of principles on how do you build an ecosystem. And those apply for service business, for product business, for software business, even for associations, all right? The definition of the platform basically is an open architecture. And by that, we don't mean technical architecture, we mean operating architecture, rules of governance, and mechanisms to facilitate interactions. The open architecture essentially allows everyone to participate and exchange ideas in a standardized way. If you don't put that standardized way, you have chaos. You have essentially a very random ecosystem where the species have not evolved in a structured way, all right? So you have to add this structured and standardized way where everybody has to follow that particular structure. When you look, for example, at startup competitions, everybody comes and gives an elevator pitch, and that elevator pitch has a specific structure. Why? Because, that's the only way this thing can scale and be managed. The next one is governance. The governance gives the power to steer community behavior and grow the collective asset or the collective IQ and innovate. Now, the actual preaching from Marshall van Einstein, the platform professor at Boston University, says that the platform should also put the governance in a way that you steer bad actors away from messing up with the ecosystem. So if you're going to bring an ecosystem and all these suppliers and competing suppliers come into that ecosystem, how do you actually build something that creates a community behavior, and you don't get somebody who wants to promote only their products trying to basically bypass the community, right, and serve their own self-serving interests, right? So the governance really has to be there, whether this is electronic, board-based, or whatever, to steer that behavior so that the collective IQ comes balanced in an innovative way. And finally, the most important thing, without interactions, this thing is not going to scale. Interactions is a means by which the value is created by aggregating the community expertise. So you got to take those interactions, you got to take the community expertise, you got to package it, you got to share it back, and that becomes a continuous loop. And if you do that successfully, and it's extremely difficult to do with diverse ecosystem of stakeholders, but if you do successfully, you can be the next Apple, you can be the next Google, all right? We're talking about Greek unicorns, but Greek unicorns, the unicorns don't get evolved like this. They have to basically have an ecosystem strategy. With that, I will go with a specific example, because the Global Semiconductor Alliance is an association like you guys. It's not, a technical community. It's a business community that shares trends, market trends, economics, geopolitics, and all this kind of stuff, right? It has 270 members. It's basically the board of GSA, not my board. My board is a trusted IoT ecosystem, but the board of the super company is essentially all the CEOs of companies that you know in the semiconductor industry, and executives from Azure, AWS, Dell, Cisco, Tesla, you name it, all right? But of course, all the chip suppliers, because that's how it started. So it represents $530 billion industry. And the reason we started this ecosystem, and I was the one that passionately started this, and people think I'm crazy, but you live only once, is because it primarily catered to the left side of the industry, the chips, all right? But in a world that you go to the edge, you have essentially vulnerabilities that occur at the end of the value chain that may occur anywhere in the value chain. And those vulnerabilities can be the security vulnerabilities or quality and performance vulnerability. When you have a chip failing in a car or in a plane, that's a vulnerability, regardless if it was a security intrusion or whether it was a lack of quality issue. So what happens is we have all these members in red here, semiconductors, which is EDA companies, IP companies, chip suppliers, foundries, and guys who do the packaging, of chips. Then you go to the ODMs, devices and systems, which is ODMs, systems OEMs, and EMS, which is the assembly houses of the boards. And I'm sure that Petros will relate to that and then you got all the edge applications that come on the top of the firmware, the hypervisor, the operating systems, the hypervisors, the applications, etc. So if you think about that, the reason why GSA ties started to grow, and I couldn't believe it, I started this idea about a year ago, and suddenly we're about 50 companies and over 100 contributors. It's impossible to manage right now because I don't have the automation to manage it. But part of the reason is because people recognize that the value of ecosystem is extremely important in a world of geopolitical tensions, particularly when it comes to the supply chain, not only because of supply chain shortages, but because when you look at the manufacturing capacity, 60% of the chip manufacturing capacity is in Taiwan, TSMC, and that's a threat given, potential moves by China, and about 90 or 80% of the assembly is also in China. So the whole world, particularly US and EU, all right, is in an interesting situation when it comes to supply chain. So we basically created the fundamental three elements that I told you before, which is an architecture that everybody from all these disciplines, from chip to PCB to system to edge application, can come. It's open and participatory. We have ways to broaden the network effects and exclude bad actors, but the major focus is not on restricting, but broadening the IQ. And more importantly, we create this concept of shift left value creation. Let me just give an example. When I pitched the vision from the chip to the edge to the systems guys, they said, great vision, but nobody understood it. When I actually changed the order and I masked the left-hand side and I started pitching from the systems down to the chip, everybody went, aha, all right? What that really means is that the requirements come from the end application. And if the chip guys knew those requirements, you wouldn't have to spend 3 years from a chip to the edge application to solve certain problems. You would essentially reaggregate the supply chain. You would create what we call the digital thread, all right? And if you can actually add all the security mechanisms and the testing mechanism for quality in that value thread, in that value chain, you can start thinking about the whole digital transformation, digital threads, trusted data analytics, and of course, trusted digital twins, which will help the entire industry to scale. So it is big. I may never do this in my lifetime, but you live only once, and this is what makes sense to do, given what we're facing today with the disruptive technologies coming in, which, by the way, you will hear Yanis and Petros talk about. Now, but in order to give it a concrete example of what it means for the business, I'm going to use the Harvard Business Review Smart Connected Product Supply Economics. Everybody understands. You will see examples from Yanni, but we have all these different end markets. We have different edges from OT to IT to IoT. And of course, there will be, there will be over $460 billion of services that could be offered in those marketplaces. And those services will be powered by billions of connected devices, but the billions of connected devices in the smart infrastructure, transportation, industry, et cetera, will be powered by trillions of chips. So I went and told the semiconductor industry, why are you thinking of your component as a product? You are disconnected from the supply chain. You're disconnected from the value chain of IoT. Think about it also as a connected product. Because a smart connected device, if you're a legacy supplier and you're not connected, you have no visibility in your supply chain, you have higher operating costs because of maintenance support, and you don't scale like others. You're an old legacy supplier and you will die because the new suppliers will beat you up, all right? But if you become a smart connected supplier by adding sensors, security, and a fingerprint for each product, a truly inboard fingerprint, not just a serial number, right? Whereby you can connect and link the data to the product's fingerprint, all right? Then you get all these advantages, visibility, lifecycle management, user support, et cetera. But of course, when you become connected, you have the Pandora's box up and up. In fact, they said, I've seen a caricature once that the most secure environment in any country is the environment of government in Greece, because it's stacks of papers. Nobody can hack through those stacks of papers. But when you're connected and you have access to all this data, it's very easy to essentially tamper things. You tamper the chips, you tamper the systems, and of course you can tamper the data, and the data is money. So how do we actually protect the data? The answer is digitalization, digital transformation that essentially will create a digital thread. You see the arrows here? Those are digital thread of data in a way that enables monetization for all sales stakeholders. This is another reason why the people are joining, even systems companies are joining GSI ties. If you allow Azure and AWS and Google to control the monetization of services by controlling the root of trust in the chip, then the whole industry will go down. So the ability to distribute, all right, the digital thread in a way that whoever is a data producer, they can secure it and they can make it available through a key to a data consumer downstream. Because if my chip produces data for automotive, and that automotive goes to a PCB that goes to a CCU and ECU in automotive, all right? And, I want to have the ability to have my ECU and CCU being connected to the internet, get data in and out, and potentially even predict failures on the chip that would be catastrophic in a car, all right? So how do you do that? Well, this is where digital transformation comes in. And digital transformation is not a rocket science. Departments like in any enterprise, departments like finance, HR, marketing, they've been governed by what we call digital workflows. Business process management, business process organization. The enterprise sector has matured on this. But if you take the tech companies and you look at the design teams, all right, then you go to a little bit of black hole, because design teams basically operate on connected data. They have project management, they have repositories of design, etc. But they're not organized and digitalized the same way the rest of the enterprise is. And that's the difference between the blue, design to manufacturing. There's the design for digital assets, and there's manufacturing for physical assets. And Petros will talk about that, all right? So those processes today, they're managed by ERP systems, etc., but they're not fully digitalized. And, depending upon where you are, they may not even close. But the most advanced companies, they have essentially the ERP systems. So the ability to essentially connect the digitalization workflows with the design and manufacturing flow workflows, is extremely important, but it's not going to be useful to create a digital thread if you don't bring that ecosystem IQ together, because everybody has a domain expertise that the other side does not understand. So what you do is you bring that ecosystem together, and then you add in every process. You see these boxes here? That's a process. That's any process, manufacturing steps, design steps, and each step on the process has an owner, certain initial inputs, the receivables, and certain outputs, the deliverables. That's what you digitalize. You add blockchain for anti-tampering. You add encryption for making sure that you have a key to protect your data. And then you essentially add attestation to allow your data to be shared through potentially metadata indices through a grand ecosystem from other people in the ecosystem in a way that you can monetize your data. And that's why people really love this idea, because everybody can see that in my hardware product that generates data, I can actually protect the data derived from my product, protect my intellectual property, and eventually monetize that. But at the same time, that digital thread creates essentially a link with the edge applications in whatever environment you operate, the industrial, your home, mil-aero, or whatever environment this device and chip is, so that you can get data in a secure way that will enable you to create trusted digital twins. And the trust here is a key concept, because it involves two areas. The one is security, that is classic security with certificates and keys, etc. But the other is, and that's for digital assets, but the other is the physical assets, where you need to connect through unique fingerprints and identifiers the digital assets with the physical assets. I know this may be a little too much for some of you to understand, but some of you have been software developers understand the right-hand side. The guys who are hardware developers understand the left-hand side. But this is giving you an idea of how do we take the digital and physical assets and merge them. And I would leave you with that concept that this was a platform, but there's no reason why you cannot orchestrate platforms within logistic ecosystems. You can go to a presentation that I gave back into the IoT strategy forum for the EU, because the EU now is thinking about how to create orchestration platforms among platform association. So it can be HAMAC association, it can be GSA, it can be, it can be all these different standards, bodies, and associations that are disconnected, but you can orchestrate it. And the example that we gave is the Charter of Trust from Siemens that essentially defines strategic principles for security. And then the ecosystem IQ that can be using GSA to define end-to-end solutions with GSA ties, but then have other organizations such as Digital Trust Forum, Industrial Internet Consortiums to create specs around those solutions, because we define only business solutions. And then those specs can lead to what we call proof of concept projects that essentially illustrate the value proposition of the classic razor, the hardware, razor blade, the software services in the ecosystem. And once you basically prove that, you can start thinking about co-innovation by all, but more importantly, a POC, a proof of concept, is a small demo, to put it simply. In order to scale that in a connected ecosystem, the investment required is very, very big. And no executive will want to take that investment and do it unless they have that proof of concept. So the idea here, then, you can have essentially the classical product marketing approach. The top little box here, Charter of Trust, is the strategy. The ecosystem IQ is the definition of the ecosystem offering and the specification implementation. And of course, the business partnerships is what people need to come together in delivering proof of concept concepts, and of course, scaling those to the investment that is needed for the whole industry to scale. With that, I went a little over what I plan to do, 45 minutes. Appreciate your time. I need to step out for a minute, and I'll be back in about 45 minutes.
First, thank you, Leonidas. Thank you, Tom, for an exemplary presentation of the new concepts in business development, the ecosystem approach, and the new paradigms in platform cooperation. I would use what Tom said as, I would say, also a paradigm shift opportunity for discussing one, to my opinion, important issue regarding the common way we understand and we discuss and we speak about technology in business. As you all know, and thank you for being with us this evening, the main theme of this webinar is market entry strategies in the era of digital disruption. Taking into account what Tom said about the ecosystem approach and the platform approach in the era of digital disruption and digital transformation, we could easily translate or transliterate the title into adaptation and survival in the new global ecosystem. Because actually, most of the words we use for describing those new ecosystems and the new opportunities that arise from us being in this wonderful new era of digital technology and digital disruption is not far away from the feelings that explorers 500 years ago faced when they explored new territories, uncharted territories, where they used to put on the map dragons and lions, warning the new venturers that they may find these difficulties, and they should be aware that nothing is easy, and they must find and write their own maps using their own tools and their own information. What we discussed and what very nicely Tom put into his discussion on the ecosystems is that now we are using a new paradigm in business, a new paradigm in science, which comes more than from biology than from mechanics. Is the Darwin's paradigm versus the older Newton paradigm of the clockwork mechanism. And now we are talking on markets, not as mechanisms as we used or our entrepreneurial fathers and grandfathers used many decades ago, not as mechanism, but as competitive environments. And actually, we're talking about our own companies, not as mechanism and working as precisely as clocks, but more as developing dynamic organisms. And we use many, many other words, which leads us to the evolutionary approach to the corporation development and the life cycle of products. Terms that, as I studied, and I did study biology many years ago, were in the biology textbooks, but not in the business documents. Of course, in this new era, as also Tom said, we have a new kind of monsters, someone could say, giants, digital giants, that are already present in the new uncharted territories and maybe sometimes frighten the newcomers, the new venturers to them. It's already a reality that in most new markets, geographical or others, at least one of the top 10 giants has already a very severe presence, a very important placement. From Google to the newcomers, if we could say Tesla a newcomer, they are already there. And to the new venturer, the digital venturer, the digital entrepreneurial venturer of the 21st century, the world map sometimes seems a puzzle which is difficult, chaotic, and very away from his approach of doing business quickly, efficiently, and with precise data. Of course, everything changes when we have the data in hand. And when we put those data on the maps, it makes us easier to understand and connect the different pieces, and of course, understand their real importance in our future, in our strategy, in our projections. Of course, when we are talking about markets and new markets, we should define what and where exactly they lie. Sometimes when we're talking about new markets, we're talking about new territories. Now, the new markets are sometimes they're multidimensional. They have a geographical parameter, but also demographic, a very important sectoral related to industries or new industries, and of course, sometimes in a very severe sense, institutional. And also, it is different, and our approach should be different if we are talking about approaching new users or new users for existing products and existing services. One common force in all markets, and a supporting force, and sometimes it would be like the old trade winds that help sailors and merchants sail into the new season, the new markets, is that this planet is now readily connected. We're talking about the planet internet, which makes life easier for the digital disruptors, for digital innovators, but of course also magnifies some problems and magnifies also the presence and the power of the 10 giants that we mentioned before. But we should have in mind that this particular planet is now almost connected in every single place, in every city, in every area of the world. And in a planet of nearly 8 billion population, more than half have already, they use systematically the internet, mobile devices, the mobile internet, and also almost half of them are active social media users. This week, the mobile world and the data from GSMA, which is the International Association for the Mobile Technologies, show that the population of internet devices in this world surpasses by far the number of the human population and the active users. More than 10 billion internet devices are now communicating between another without many times the participation of humans in the communication. Of course, humans are subjects to the end results or to the measurements of those devices. And this is going to be even bigger, is booming, as 5G technologies are widely tested and implemented all around the world in areas that are not the old markets that we addressed in the past years. We see that Asia Pacific is developing with a great rhythm, and some other countries lag behind. This puts a new way of approaching the growth strategies that in the past were easily put into I wouldn't say into the textbooks, but into the basic knowledge of every company, how to enter, penetrate existing markets with already existing products, and how to work on new markets with new products and all the intermediary ways. But now we face a new reality where things are changing very, very quickly. Actually, every market and every product changes like biological organisms. In 6 months, they're different than what we see now. And in 18 months, due to also to Moore's law, they will be completely different. And if we see the big cities market, which is an important mapping for those associated with smart cities and technologies related to big cities, we see that they grow with an intense rate, and projections show that the planet in the next 10 years would be completely different in terms of urban presence. Of course, also, if we see another mapping of the future related to the way the 5G projects are implemented and the announced trials field trials are already applied, we see that there are areas of opportunity that were not in our mapping of the same planet 5 or 6 years ago. Of course, all those new information and new challenges may panic some companies, some entrepreneurs, but usually what is our fear is that competition will force us to be aside and not to be able to enter and to flourish and to exploit those new possibilities and new markets. It's very interesting that the only way humanity and nature and biology has found to address big predators is to organize. And this is the way small fish can do in competitive environments. And one of the clusters that participate in the Balkan Black Sea and Baltic Association of ICT companies and associations had put it in a very nice concard some years ago. Don't panic, organize. The first step to organize is to see the market entry process as an information gathering and planning and business planning operation. And this is well written and well developed by institutions. This structure I present here is basic KPMG approach to market entry evaluation and entry process, but it's always interesting to go back to the basics when we are talking about those important things. The most important thing that someone should have in mind that he has to work on the basic assumptions and assessments of this market, to assess the market in numbers, quantitatively and qualitatively, and also to access the internal capacity and capability of the organization to enter this market. This, together with some external factors, will determine the approach, the strategy, and the tactics. Of course, having this data starts a very bold and very important and difficult and resource-consuming process, which is the preparation for market entry. Someone should work on the business case. What business cases must be developed for utilizing the opportunities of this market? Who are the possible partners? And how and what will be the criteria for their selection? The potential and the opportunities for creating synergies. And of course, all the operation-related planning, the regulatory and tax structuring, the exploration of various incentives that may exist in some markets, and of course, creating a plan, a roadmap, which will be the main map for this venture. And of course, the most difficult and risky phase, which is the implementation. Assessing the market is actually a gathering of data and putting a lot of intelligence into analyzing those data and analyzing the basic risks and the basic factors that could change our planning or could change the environment. The analysis of the entry barriers and the assessment of the cost to enter the market, and of course, the availability of resources and the profiling of the various competitors. Some things that most of the small companies do not have the resources to do them in detail, but this is something that collectively is much easier to be done. So associations, clusters, and other collective bodies can do it for their members, lowering the cost and sharing the cost, and sometimes also sharing the risk. something that it's not easy to be done by an external factor, either this be an association of a chamber of commerce or any other assisting organization, is the internal capability assessment, which seems that the only entity that could do it is the company itself, where we are talking sometimes for small, medium enterprises. It's easier and it's a learning experience to assess the internal capacity to go into a new market. Either this market is geographical or sectoral or any other kind of it. It needs to understand and to clarify the vision and the objectives. What we expect from this market, what's our vision for our company and for its growth path, to understand and to be self-critical on understanding the internal core competencies, which are the engine that could drive us forward, and performing the infamous SWOT analysis and internal SWOT analysis of those things. And last but not least, measuring the DOI. What is the DOI? On textbooks, it's referred as the degree of internationalization of a company. And it's measured practically by the ratio of foreign sales to total sales for existing companies or companies that have already an international presence, or you could, because sometimes this refers to exporting only, someone could say that it's the ratio of sales into in the new market to total sales of the company. The experience, international or in the new market, of the top management, and other factors, which practically someone could make this measurement in an easy way, very easily, having in mind that one of the most important parameters is the second one. How much was the part of the employees spending, time spending mainly, on venturing, on exploiting, or preparing the new activities, either international or entry in the new sectoral or other markets. This is one of the most important factors. And it reminds us of an old saying that you cannot have a future unless you are prepared for it. You are thinking for it, you are dreaming for it. You cannot penetrate a new market unless you are dreaming for it, you are preparing for it, and you spend time on it. Creating your plans, gathering information, gathering intelligence, and the others. When you do gather all the necessary data and make the analysis, it's much easier to decide the market entry strategies, which actually most of us is the first thing that we try to figure out before making the analysis sometimes. And the market entry strategies, at least the old ones, are either direct involvement in the market, exporting if it's an international market. The other way is indirect access by having an intermediary that does all the practical work in the market, the local work in the market. It's sometimes a joint venture in a formal or an informal sense, a strategic alliance, or a direct foreign investment, a greenfield operation, which actually means that someone invests heavily and creates a new entity that not only is present in the market, but also produces and has the full operations in this market. I will go in a bit detail on this, not because this is something that you cannot find it or discuss it with your business consultants or even in supporting material from exporting organizations, but because this would help us in the discussion to sometimes to exchange some experience, practical experience from what other companies from our associations, from our clusters have already done. One of the first steps a company tries to do is direct exporting, especially if it's a digital company and finds the way of direct exporting via digital channels easy, quick. E-commerce help us open a shop in a different country, in a different environment very easily. And the current state of logistics and e-commerce help us send products very easily, but it stops there. The main disadvantage is that if someone doesn't have presence in this market, supporting mechanism, continuous information for the foreign market and direct access to some customers, it's not easy to expand its business. Of course, in digital, in intangible products, this is much, much easier. But when products become tangible and they also have to be, they are subject to certification or regulation, this is something that imposes several difficulties and creates certain barriers. The first way to address those issues is the way of indirect exporting, talking always about SMEs that don't have the capacity and the resources to invest on creating their own supporting operations. Indirect exporting is actually selling either to intermediary or to an export management company that does the exporting and all the necessary logistic and money collection, shipment, and other issues. Of course, this even lowers even more the access to the end customers, the access to the market, to the company, and actually it creates a different. It's a hybrid approach, which most easily for digital and intangible products moves into another way of doing business, which is licensing. So selling the knowledge for producing the product to another company, or sometimes for using the knowledge for producing their own branded product. Sometimes it could be also done for the branding of for the name and the branding of the product. And this is something, of course, that many companies that are very strong in knowledge and in patents, but not in production, they can easily follow this path in order to expand their international presence. Of course, this also creates and has very important regulatory, legal, and other issues that have to be addressed from the very, very beginning. Two other ways of addressing in other markets, and I repeat, mainly in the geographical aspect, but not only the geographical, is by creating a franchise, someone that has the full operation for providing the end products and end services to the end customers using a strong brand and a common and consistent way of servicing, marketing and services the customers. Of course, this is best suited for well-established companies that have already a brand name and have already the operations to support such a wide network of franchisees and expansion also of this business. Last but not last, one important but not easily addressed, more complicated way of doing business in other markets is by creating joint ventures, or in a larger extent, going into the merger and acquisition arena. Actually, that means that someone could try to find a partner to create a joint venture. Partner means sharing not only the risk, but sharing common values, understanding the way of doing business, feeling confident that they work in the same value, not only value chain, the same product and the same value creation. And of course, it needs, if you go into the merger and acquisition, a most prominent way of addressing and accessing all the issues that are related not only with the financial and mechanics of a merger and acquisition, but also with the organic consolidation of two different entities that must be one. For larger companies, or for companies that could find financing for special operation in special markets, the DFI, the greenfield investment sometimes feels and looks as the most prominent, very costly, of course, because it needs a high initial investment and risky operation, but this is the one that creates fully an entity where the company has almost full control, because actually is a replication of the same entity into the new environment. Of course, this is a big operation that if it has also production parameters and production special areas and special markets like the health market or the health sector or other sectors that are highly regulated, is very, very important for someone to have all those risks and all those parameters considered and addressed. Of course, for SMEs, sometimes the tactics they use for entering those new markets, it's much less complicated, following what the so-called guerrilla approach, which is actually entering into the market with the minimal means that someone has and fighting on the streets and everywhere for placing the projects, using innovative ways, and also using all the means of viral expansion, all the means of viral marketing, and all the means of buzz creation for expanding the awareness for the products, the brand awareness for the company, and creating through personal networks and communities buzz, awareness, excitement, and enthusiasm for the products and its services. And this is something, of course, that, as all guerrilla tactics, is not easily formulated, put into textbooks, but of course it's something that is subject to experience exchange, learning from the mistakes that someone does. And because all of us, we cannot do all the mistakes alone, it's better to try to learn from the mistakes of our friends or other that are willing to share the difficulties they faced and the mistakes they done and the way they addressed and they surpassed them with us. And this is, of course, part of a collective experience, which is also much more easily worked and developed inside associations, inside clusters, inside collective entities that create trust between the members, even if those members are in a bit or in a sense competitors in their existing market. But as we many times in SEKEE we're discussing, competitors in one market may be cooperators, partners in exploring a new one. And we saw it many times that actually we are competitors, as they say, in many, many aspects. We share, or we are competitors in the small market, the small national market, and we try together to explore and create and expand our reach into new markets, which only can be done collectively. And by the way, this was one of the main themes we had in this very important presence of our association for 9 years, the Mobile World Congress, which is the largest digital congress and exhibition held in Barcelona. Of course, last year in 2020, it was cancelled. It was the first that was cancelled due to the pandemic, but it came back. And in 2022, we will be there. We were also this June in the hybrid event, but there we see, and we have seen that the key element for a presence in the new business, in the new markets, is synergies. Synergies, even if you are small or if you are medium-sized or big. One of the interesting things that changes many of the parameters and the aspects of the game, of the market expansion game, as Tom said in his introductory presentation, is the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution. And of course, when we're talking about Fourth Industrial Revolution, we're talking about mainly the digitization of all industries and all parts of the economy and the society, and creating and utilizing the network technologies and the network effects for connecting and interconnecting all value chains and all aspects of the production and the society. It was very interesting that one way of looking at the Fourth Industrial Revolution was the saying by the chief of Siemens Marine, who said that in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the same brain power that has gone in the previous years into creating apps for smartphones and software for computers, now is creating applications and software for smart factories, smart cities, and smart ships, which actually, this points us a very important aspect of market penetration, of entering a new market. The same people, the same companies, the companies that 5 or 10 years ago were serving certain markets with certain products, actually under this general concept of Industry 4 and in the era of digital transformation, they open new windows, new doors, new channels. New opportunities have opened for them for presenting their knowledge in new sectors and creating new products for new markets that sometimes didn't exist before, or they existed in a very different sense, and now they're completely disrupted and changed. In this period, one of the most interesting, but also very, very important change was that most of the products, I would say all, even the new, and of course, not we're not talking only for the digital products. All the products are not considered, could not be considered alone, separately, distinctively, but they should be considered as part of a system, or as part of a competitive ecosystem that either includes the interconnection between the products that create a platform or a product system, or as an ecosystem for the competitive products that could sometimes even cooperate. So if we keep the digital aspect, we went very quickly from the product to the intelligent product that has some software and hardware embedded. So it became a bit intelligent. Then it became connected via wired or wireless network. It became part of a system. The aircraft and the aircraft industry is a good example for this. And of course, the same industry and other industries expanded into a multi-system industries where multiple systems interconnect between them via the digital, and not only the digital networks. This led also to the companies and the producers of those products to be forced to understand their existence not as a separate entity, but as a part of an interconnected system, which in a linear form takes the form of a value chain. But actually, as we all know, it's not, it's much more complex than this. It's an ecosystem. And those new ecosystems have emerged in all industries. All industries now must be seen and must be analyzed as ecosystems where the digital aspect and the digital transformation aspect and the digital disruption aspect is the most important factor of their evolution or their future form. From smart homes, smart cities, agriculture, autonomous driving, the marine industry, the environment, the energy, everything is a system, is an ecosystem of interconnected entities where one part is and will be in the future many more interconnected micro systems, IoT systems or edge computers, etc. And the other part is the interconnected human entities, either in the form of companies or users or individual users, but they will be part of this man-to-machine to network. A new network that is part of this new way of thinking and seeing the changes in technology and science, which for some analysts is the prerequisite and the announcement of a new wave, a new revolutionary wave in industry and science and technology, which is the sixth wave, the bio-based evolution, where information technologies with biology and all the other aspects of the industrial ecology form together a new economy, a new industry, and of course, many, many, many new markets. Seeing and hoping and understanding and feeling that this is not far away, actually, in the terms of, if we could say as a pilot, has already started. And one of the catalysts for this acceleration was the COVID pandemic. The COVID pandemic showed in many ways that cooperation between different entities, different scientific disciplines, different industries, and different parts of the societies was not just necessary, was crucial, was life-saving approach. And this will move much faster in the following years, with or without the virus. I will not put a lot of words on the digital transformation issues, which will be addressed in more detail, were addressed by in some detail by Tom, and will be addressed in more detail by Peter in the in the following discussion. But I will take a few minutes on looking on a humorous but also very important aspect of this new world of digital transformation, which is the way that 9 laws that we usually use as humorous approach to our problems determine our future. All of us know, when we are familiar with Moore's law, digital density doubles almost every 2 years. Actually, everything that has the word digital almost doubles every 2 years, even if it's product, technology, or even content. Either doubles in capacity, capability, or cuts half its price. And also, together with Moore's law, Murphy's law, show us that all the problems that could arise, they arise, and everything that could go wrong will go wrong, and will go wrong at the worst moment. So we must be prepared for this. And 80% of the problems, or 80% of the opportunities, of the results, come from 20% of the cases, of the causes. Those are nice. And that leads us also to another view of the way that we organize, because we have to organize much quickly. We have to reorganize and transform our organizations by eliminating problems and multiplying the opportunities and the capacities and the positive. But we must remember Conway's law that organizations design systems that mimic their organizational structures. So most of our organizations design their systems in the way they were in the past, not looking forward. So they need to transform themselves and get new knowledge, new ideas, innovation, also from the outside world. I wouldn't go in detail with the other laws, which I'm quite sure you are all familiar. But I will go to the last one, the Martek's law, which is a newcomer. It's something that most of us have already understood, that something is going wrong there. It's peculiar. And Martek says that technology changes exponentially, but organizations change logarithmically. That means that as technology moves, evolves, there is a gap widening and widening, because the organizational change is slow, and we feel it. And we feel that sometimes even big companies, not only the smaller ones, cannot follow the technological change, though they put many resources. Now, I'm not talking about the companies that are not agile and not keen to follow change. Of course, there were sometimes some cataclysmic events when Martek made this observation, put these words into a so-called statement, which is considered the law now. He was talking about cataclysmic events that accelerate the adaptation, that create a window for rapid adaptation of the technological change. And this happened last year. The COVID was such a cataclysmic event, which in many aspects of our society, our industries, our companies, they forced us to adopt technological change, not only in teleworking and teleconferencing, but in many other things. And this is a force and a state change that at least for the next 3 to 5 years will have effect as an accelerating force in many areas. And of course, we have to have in mind that in our area of the world, I'm talking about the southeastern Europe, we are not ready, or we don't seem, or in the maps, in the data, they don't show us as ready to exploit this change, this rapid change. The Industry 4.0 map shows that in our part of the world, the technology readiness and Industry 4 readiness is low, is very low, except some areas it shows in Bulgaria and Romania and a small part of Greece. So we have to work on this. And we have to work very quickly by working those concepts into expanding, we believe, our services, our products, our presence in new markets that are not always geographical. Actually, most of the opportunities lie in other areas which are sectorial sectors. The agro-food sector, the life sciences and health and pharma, information and communication technologies. Most of you, I believe, agree, because I have seen the same approach in most of the documents from companies, from associations, from state organizations all over the area. The question is how we can do it fast, and how we can do it by lowering the barriers that exist for small, medium enterprises. Because actually, for the future, for the smart future, for the smart cities future, for the smart economy future, we have to move quickly. And there is an opportunity, especially for the small, medium enterprises. There are some areas that already in SEKEE, most of you know SEKEE as HAMAC, which was the old name of the association, because HAMAC was actually the Hellenic Association of Mobile Application Companies, SEKEE in Greek. In Greek, it continues to be SEKEE, but the K changed from mobile to innovative, so it expanded the scope of the association to include all the innovative technologies, and especially those, of course, that are related to mobile and 5G. But this will be in more detail presented by the board of directors of SEKEE in the next occasion. I would say that in SEKEE, this area of opportunity was described and roughly mapped, seeing as areas of opportunity the synergies in the marine and logistics area, which is very important in the Mediterranean area and the Black Sea area. Of course, most of the countries, they have relations with the shipping industry, with the shipbuilding industry, but also with the logistics related to the sea and intramodal and interconnections between the marine industry, the rails and road transportation. Also in the agro-food sector, a very important sector for Southeastern Europe, and also very important sector now for Europe as a whole. You remember in the past years that Europe tried to push out the agricultural sector from the continent, and now desperately we try to get it back for food safety reasons, for capacity reasons, and also for expanding the opportunities that arise from the smart agriculture and technology and implementation of technologies in agriculture. Also tourism, a very interesting, very important sector where already most of the tourists already are connected via their mobile devices, and the tourist sector makes great moves into their interconnection and creating new platforms for serving citizens, tourists, and other travelers. The same also goes to the health sector, well known to most of you, and especially most important if we take into account the effects of the pandemic and then continuous need for medical advice, for care, not only health as prevention and as medical approach, but also life well-being, welfare, and medical care. The environment related to waste management and air pollution, and of course, all the effects of climate change and the effects of climate change in cities, in rural areas, in our cultural heritage, and all the aspects of human society. And of course, the government services and the services to the public, which must be digitized, and it's a great area of opportunity for SMEs to create new generation of services, not the central government services, but a new way of connecting the central government services with the real life of the citizens. In this area, there is a vast assortment of new technologies. A report from McKinsey addresses and lists 12 of them, which are going to make the major change in the 21st century economy, at least for the first half of the 21st century. And they are talking that this will create new value in the existing or new or disrupted markets that will exceed many, many trillions of dollars. The numbers there are not in billions, are in trillions. Even though someone could be aware of the numbers multiplied in various reports are not always accurate, the dynamics of this change and this disruption is already felt in many, many industries. And those technologies are the technologies that already are served by most of the companies that participate in this aggregation of innovative actors or innovative associations that are part of this project. Mobile internet, number one, changes everything already. The automation of knowledge work, the so-called artificial intelligence, which is not artificial intelligence if we be precise, it's machine learning. And actually, the most correct way is automation of knowledge work, either supporting humans in their decision-making or transforming some of this decision-making to machines by using algorithms with data and continuous monitoring by other smart entities, which more or less at last are human. The Internet of Things, which is, as we all know, a major transformer of all industries and all human activities. I will not go in detail for each sector, but we need to address and to understand the opportunities that arise not just by utilizing those technologies, but seeing those technologies as catalysts for our companies' entry to the new markets. Those are the tools that would enable the smaller companies to address the issues and the needs of major markets, not only in the national level, not only on the wider regional level, but on the international level, because if you are keen of solving problems and needs using this technology in one sector, it's easy to move into another sector or into another country. So, mobile internet, collective intelligence and the automation of knowledge work, Internet of Things, and cloud are, and we have seen it already, the major disruptors for all industries. And augmented by advanced robotics, supplemented by advanced robotics, which is coming every day in a more creative way. The autonomous or near-autonomous vehicles, the next generation genomics, which also COVID accelerated vastly this sector, creates new markets for agriculture, new markets for transportation, new markets for smart cities and services for the citizens. Together with energy storage, which is already a technology applied in mobile phones, now in autonomous cars, and as we have seen in pilot projects in ships and other, of course in flying vehicles, it changes the way the mobility in the planet. It gives energy, not wireless, actually, and not wired connection to vehicles and other devices. 3D printing has already made its presence, and it's very easy to implement in various industries. It's a matter more of innovative solutions than to creating new technological innovation, together with all the aspects of advanced materials. The problem is that in those areas, in our country, and also the other related to energy and renewable energy technologies, the issue for our countries is that though we have a lot of human power, knowledge, scientific personnel, and companies in those fields, most of them work not collectively, not synergistically, so that they cannot address the major issues efficiently, quickly, and business-wise with big results, having the effects, the multiplying effects of the size. And the most important issue that we where we are associations, clusters, and synergistic entities, where we could put our efforts and our resources, and of course this also needs a positive approach and a positive mentality from all the other players in creating synergies for strategies. Synergies for market entry strategies and market exploitation strategies. Because this is something that sometimes we hear from many companies that it's not easy for them to solve all the problems or to address all the issues for entry to the new market, for surpassing the barriers, or even for accessing the needed information and accessing the needed persons creating the networks or getting the intelligence they need. So this is number one priority, I believe, in creating synergies in order to connect all those items and aspects. And this is something that we have already started in the past years by trying to expand our ecosystem, to be present in the international events, and via the international events connecting with international markets, either geographical or sectorial, and also creating all the necessary infrastructure and skills and knowledge and development of capacity in order to be able to address those things. But this is something that needs more synergies and maybe would be one of the most interesting results and aspects of this cooperation that led to the clusters for the future of the cities. In this sense, I would like to thank you for your participation in this webinar. I hope I didn't take much more than the scheduled time. And also thank you, Leonidas, and thank you, Tom, and thank you, Peter, who will follow, for your presence and participation.
Okay, good evening to everybody. I am Petros Soukoulias, as said by Leonidas, IT technology expert for 15 years and 20 years in electronics manufacturing. And the last 5.5 years, I have focused on the digital transformation. So allow me, I'm not going to repeat whatever you have shared so far. So a few words on what is the situation, what is the digital reality as we used to call it. We have everything, as John said, that is doubled every 2 years, and now we are expecting every 1 year in speed, capacity, flexibility, and whatever. We do have high speeds in everything, not only the cars where we used to speak about when we were child, but mostly we are referred in data transfer, in data capacity, storage capacity, etc., communication, on smart assets, on smart things, on artificial intelligence, machine learning, machine vision, edge computing, etc. So there are a lot of things that are quite new, but are quite new for just a little bit of time. In the past years, when I was young, we had the same model of the pickup, let's say, for 10 years or for 8 years. Now you have new products every 6 months. Everything is driven by data. Digital technology is used by anyone, anytime, everywhere in our daily routine. You can have global range entertainment from your home. You can see anything happens in all the world, employing the smart assets. A kiosk, a small kiosk, can promote and sell worldwide. Digital technologies allow things to happen now. A small startup can cooperate with a large firm because he has a disruptive technology, our product, and they come into an agreement and they cooperate. An engineer can monitor from his house even the production assets and can intervene, step in, and do things or interact with the production without having to be there. And a researcher can develop innovation in his own lab. Let's say, thanks to the 3D printer, he or she can do prototypes without having to be outside or looking for other manufacturers and suppliers to do things related to his research. Digital technologies, you have heard about this, no need to repeat of them. I will say only the digital twin because I haven't heard from the previous speakers. Digital twin is a very nice tool, a very excellent tool and very nice idea. Using gamification, they try to simulate with real data. They play with the copy of the real data without spending hours of the personnel using material or employing the machine. If we try to see the trends of the previous decade, and then we can compare it with this decade that we are running now, because we have named the decade 2020 to 2030 as the decade of the digital transformation. We will see that more or less we have the same trends, but now we are at other levels, or we play, let's say, differently now, and we have more on the table. And we have to add the 5G or 6G. They have started speaking about 6G. Someone make a joke on me some days ago, and he said, okay, I'm gonna speak about the 9G. And all of us, we were looking at him, but he was joking. But this joke is not far away from its implementation. Robots and cobots everywhere, autonomous vehicles and genomics, as John said, and the most important, at least for me, as an IT, I said before, is the quantum computing. This is the highest promising digital technology. Digital transformation, a lot of different definitions, is a set, the use of a set of digital technologies, the proper digital technologies in a structure, more or less on an industry. When I'm saying structure, I'm referring from now on in the industrial world, a new philosophy and ethics which accompany these digital technologies have to be designed and installed in all the functional sectors and functional areas of this industry, the structure, imposing a modern way of operation. Everyone has to forget the old habits and the old tools. Digital technology is a journey. It's a long and endless journey because she is going to pass through different stages from a lot of different, relative industrial revolutions which will follow, since technological evolutions will never stop. After a little, we will have new things, so we are going to do new things again. Digital technology, we have to confess that it will be a tough, a costly, and time-consuming phase transition to reach to the next normal, to the promised new. So we will be in a continuous moving, let's say, upgrading and improving things. So it's not something like a project. It's not something it will take 4 months and that's all. That will be a continuous process. The characteristics, adaptability to frequently changing situation. This is the demand. This is the request from the market. They change very quickly and very frequently. So if you are a manufacturing company, you should be capable of changing quite fast. Low cost experimentation. You don't have to do the same procedures and processes as you do in the classical way. You should learn from the failure because everything is digitized, everything is documented. So failure counts a lot and is a part of the success. And the most important is that even you want or not, you are going to acquire a new entrepreneurial culture, which will be the new digital culture, as we may say. 120 years ago, Lord Kelvin, English, said that we cannot improve something we cannot measure. And Mr. Carl Pearson said the same thing, but in a positive, not in a negative statement. We can measure what we can improve it. And whatever is reported from the things that we can measure, it can be improved exponentially. Last but not least, John Dare said about the measure what matters. I did agree even just some years ago. Now I don't agree with him, but because we measure whatever it can be measured. So we don't have problem to measure only what matters, because it is very difficult to judge what is matter to be measured in a machine and what is not measured. So you can measure everything, to me. European Union in the previous frame program did a lot of work and invested a lot of money in projects and creating digital infrastructure and services. Now they have written down the new Digital Europe program, more than 7 billion specific for the digital transformation. They have issued the digital compass, which, as it depicted in the transparency, it focuses on the skills of personnel. More than 20 million in this decade should be the ICT specialist, and no less than 80% of the population will not have the basic digital skills. Okay, I'm not going to read it, but please see that in public services, they want 100% all the key public services online and 100% availability for the medical records. The most important is the business one, but you can read that in the digital compass in the European Union side. For first time, we have digital citizen rights. No need to read them, but they speak about protection of personal data and privacy, protection of the intellectual creation of individuals in the online space. They have started creating things that they were not on the table, and expect the digital rights. We have the digital principles. They have sat down and they have created frameworks and rules. So we will have a lot of imposed things to do, and especially the ethics one. And they are doing a lot about the ethicals in artificial intelligence. Just referring that as a sample of the concern of the European Union for the digital era, for the digital applications which are coming in front of us. So, finishing, digital implementation varies from country to country. There are quite different pictures. The implementation is quite different, and the rhythm they implement a digital transformation is quite different. Full digital transformation, if we see in the industries, as we saw in the map before, there are very small percentage, especially in our area, concerning Greece and in the European Union, in the Balkans. We still have incompatible systems, and the big problem still holds that we have a lot of suppliers inside an industry, which creates a major problem to manage to handle. There are no engineers with the proper skills and know-how on digital technology. In some years, we should have an architect for the digital technology. Otherwise, a large firm cannot work with IT or the engineer that is for the production. Company personnel needs education and training quite often, because still it is highly poor, except some countries. The most difficult seems to be to create administrative culture, and especially in the case that the owners are the managers also. And the last but not least, the pandemic, which slowed down the evolution, seems to have some recovery, which is now visible at the end of the tunnel. So what is the difference between Industry 4 and the previous evolutions? To my perception, we have competition which drives extremely fast and surprisingly. So you should be in alert every time to be able to confront with the competition. And the similarity between Industry 4 and the previous evolutions is that to change culture is changing very slow, which is quite critical. This is the driving factor. Okay, the suggestion is that you should set the digital transformation, no matter what your structure is, in the highest corporate strategic priority. Because the sooner we understand and do it, the earlier or more we are going to have benefits. I have run more than 170 visits over the last 3 years in manufacturing companies. The picture is not so, let's say, bad, but it's not so good also, because we are far from, and we are on the second year of the digital decade. So we do have a lot of things to do. But first of all, we have to update, we have to train, we have to educate people to understand what exactly is the digital transformation, because we all know what is digital transformation, but in real, we have not exactly the correct and the full picture. I would like to ask you to forgive me, because I'm in the Beyond exhibition in Thessaloniki, and they are going to shut down the place, so they are going to expel me. So thank you very much for being here and having the passion to hear us. The two previous speakers were excellent, and they described, they presented everything. It's quite high level, and I thank them for their company and Leonidas. Thank you very much, and have a nice time.
Thank you, Mr. Sigoulias. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Yanis. Thank you all for being here. And we are still quite a lot of people inside, but at that point, if you have any question, just raise your hand or chat, and we can activate your microphone or camera, and can have a discussion with the panelists.
Let me ask the first question.
Okay, but you have to answer it as well.
Yeah, of course, that's exactly right. Because Petros basically talked about what we need to do in digital transformation, how people and organizations need to change, and how we're going to drive that change. So it's not a simple matter. He said that it varies by market, by organization, by product, etc. So if it's a small company, the small enabled companies, they very easily transform themselves. In fact, if small companies, the SMBs, can basically get very cheap infrastructure tools to create essentially collaboration environments, etc., and evolve. The biggest challenge is the big companies. All right. Petros talked about digital twins. All right. Take, for example, the companies that are industrial automation. Siemens is an example. You can go look at them. You can go look at their products. They actually build PLCs and IPCs that go to factories. So when you look at big businesses that part of the legacy industry 1.0 and 2.0, et cetera, right? How do you transform the legacy and digitalize the legacy and transform it? The answer is that you have to essentially, and by the way, you can look at a thing called the TIA platform at Siemens, where basically what they've done is they've created a software capability that allows you to create digital twins of the PLCs and the IPCs. So in other words, without being physically in the factory, right, you can actually have a digital twin that you run in your computer in terms of how that behaves. And that digital twin initially is a simulator, but later on, it can connect to the actual device in the factory in real time and replace the twin simulator with a physical asset that is operating in the factory. I cannot overemphasize how important that is, not only for the operators, but also for the evolution of the automation of digital transformation. This is essential. This is very important. So, and what enables that evolution? What's the very first step in that transformation? The very first step in transforming large organizations is that the IT needs to change its mindset to be support instead of being a support organization, has to be a value add organization, because the IT manages the network, the IT manages the on-prem cloud, the IT connects to the external cloud. All right, and the IT usually has some sort of a connection with the customer. So unless you actually upgrade this, and that's a major part of the transformation, to make your IT a bigger team, all right, then you're never going to be able to build a platform business ecosystem. This is very important because it's about not connected devices or connected applications. It's about connected suppliers of devices and connected suppliers of applications. And that is exactly the way you need to start thinking about yourselves and your businesses, how you become connected. And it's not about your product, it's about your product in relation to the ecosystem that you belong. That's the idea.
Thank you, Tom, for this very interesting input.
Anyway, so the key message is that when we talk about platform ecosystems, it's not just a technical matter. It's a collaboration matter. It's a bringing, customer suppliers and partners in some sort of collaboration environment. Of course, you need some collaboration, tools to do that. But a lot of them exist today, from the simplest being this tool that we're using right now, and that is Zoom.
So, Yanis, do you want to add anything?
No, I think it was an interesting presentation. Maybe we took more time talking from our side than leaving space for hearing. So I take this as a self-critique. But I thank you.
Okay, so Yanni, you and I need to work in taking all these associations in Greece and creating a map of the associations and get them to a concept of platformation, so that you can connect the silos, between all the Greek innovation that today is a little unstructured in silos like the Greek islands, together with all the islands of diaspora, and try to see if we can actually accelerate the structured ecosystem innovation across the world for the Greeks.
Yeah, it's a very interesting issue and challenge, which applies not only to Greece, applies everywhere. Of course, in Greece, we can always be, it could be the pilot implementation, and we need it. You know why? I would say that we already had in Greece some positive actions and reactions in the past years from collective actions and initiatives between the various technology associations. But the most important is that we have a wider forum, a wider initiative in the Balkan and Black Sea, and assisted also by the Baltic countries, which makes the 3B alliance, which maybe also could use of such a platform in a wider sense. And some of the key members of this alliance were here in this workshop. Maybe we could discuss it as a future.
But that's exactly how it evolves. It starts with the islands within Greece.
Yep.
Right. I'm interested in Thessaloniki and almost everybody there now, because exactly that reason. It's a core that can start from Northern Macedonia. Obviously, we have Alexandroupolis, we have Xanthi, we have Thessaloniki. But more importantly, given the attractiveness and the investments that are being put by the Mr. Tzikostas and all these guys in that region, it is an opportunity to essentially create the Balkan Innovation Center. If we can actually bring some concepts, for Silicon Valley to coach these people and organize them and structure them together, I think the potential is phenomenal, because you go from Greek innovation ecosystem to Greek and Balkan, and they can expand to Europe and of course the world.
That's great. I'm just looking at so if we don't have anything else, I think we should summarize and close this webinar from my side and from SEKEE. I want to thank you all for being there, especially the speakers that devoted that precious time to discuss all these important issues. And thank you all for you being as well there. So have a good night, a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.